Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are here on YouTube and you want to find your way into the conversation, you have to travel to Zoom, which you'll see a little link in YouTube. Then you have to travel to Mukana, which you'll see a little link in Zoom. And you can get into the conversation, ask questions, and chat with all of us. If you are looking at this panel and you're thinking, I'd like to be part of that panel, I've got some things to share, then what you need to do is get here early. 6:40 is when you need to be here so we can do mic checks. The only time, by the way, the only time I give people a little bit of room is if I can't remember whether I did a final check before I handed it off to mic checks and I see two hands, I'm like, oh, I don't know when they came in. But usually though, once I've looked, the safest thing to do is be here by 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time to make sure that you're ready for mic checks. We also put out the Discord link at that point. That's where almost 1,000 of us keep talking. And you need to be here. It's a half an hour long and you need to be here once to get the Discord link. It only doesn't last very long. We put it into Makana. You can go find it right now. It's still valid. But you need to do that. It's kind of a rite of passage. Everybody has to get their Discord link on their own. So anyway, so you can join. We will clear you out of Discord occasionally if you don't have first name space last name. We do ask for your location if you're willing to give it to us. It's kind of cool to see where people are from. And it helps me hire people that I need locally. So just so you know, like the reason we need the location is because there are people I've hired for a specific location. And how I found them was I go into Discord and I go down the list of who is in this location. And it helps if you've been in the panel, because then I kind of, I know who that person is. And so anyway, that's the trick to why the location is so useful. And then the other thing we request is that you use a picture of yourself, full frame. If a gray or white background is even better. It looks really nice, and you can really get a sense of who people are by looking at our list there. We start the questions at 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock is when we have general Q&A. That's pretty much anything around media production, virtual production that you want to ask. You can ask that at 7. Between 7 and 8, we'll discuss those questions. And those questions drive the whole show. You are the producers for the show as the attendees. So it's really important to be there. At the second hour, we have the vertical. So this is something that we're actually talking about specifically. Today, we're going to talk about podcasting and the structure of podcasting and how to think about your podcast and what to do. So a couple of us have done a couple podcasts. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, about what it takes and what it takes to put it together. If you want to see what the rest of the schedule is, you can just look at the email you get every day if you've registered to Zoom, and you'll get a sense of what's happening over the next couple of days. So without further ado, Bill, let's go into the questions.
Okay, our first question this morning comes from Mike Keeping in Burlington, Ontario, looking for a recommendation on Thunderbolt 3 USB 4 hubs for Apple's M1. Would like it to include gigabit, power pass-through, monitor output, and the fastest external storage speed possible.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, the first thing is you got to go with OWC's Thunderbolt Pro dock, which is not shipping yet. So if you need it right away, then you might have to go for the non-powered one, which has dual monitor support. But anyways, Otherworld Computing or OWC will take care of you.
But you're looking for the Thunderbolt 4 Pro dock, right?
I put the link in, yes.
Okay, great. Awesome. There you go. Next question.
Moving on to A. Mitchells of Washington, who asks, there was a discussion yesterday about using a Dugan auto mixer for mics that are too close together, like the dual SM57s on the old presidential lectern. Are people interested in this approach? Are they actually using and mixing both lectern mics live instead of having one as a failover? And thanks.
Yeah, so usually you don't use both mics at the same time if it's a primary and backup. Typically those are two that you'll switch from one to the other if something goes wrong. You won't mix both of them together. There's a whole bunch of issues with that. But yeah, you want to but we will try to dual mic everybody that they'll let us, by the way. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, just as a general rule to anybody that I've ever talked to in professional audio, if you have multiple mics open at the same time, they should always be at least 3 times farther from each other as they are from the primary person. Without doing that, you'll get all sorts of comb filtering and messes. So dual mics in the same position, I'd always run them. Just run one, run it mono.
And yeah, there's some Sheps makes a really good, good podium mic. I'm pretty sure that's the one that. No, it's. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Sheps is the one that makes the podium mic that the Democrats use. I think for their when they do their press conferences, and it's. I just noticed it because I watch everybody's press conferences and I look at what mics they're using, and that's the best one so far. So far, when I see press conferences, whatever the Republicans are using isn't as good. They need to work on that. But you want, as we talk about presentation mics, if you look at that one, it's a fairly large return, and they usually have a dual one that's there. I just thought since we're talking about presentation mics, it's something that I'm a little obsessed with, is good presentation mics, because I have to do it a lot. Anyway, next question.
Moving on to Doug Ferguson of Fort Wayne, Indiana. And the panel, can you have two PCs, both as host in Zoom, and pin the speakers with one PC and it can affect the other?
I have no idea. Go ahead, Roscoe.
This is a case study for Zoom OSC, who we've had Andy on, and it is amazing software. It gives you so many more granular controls over Zoom. Not a ton more, but it makes it so that you could do something like that. You could certainly spread out the control amongst Stream Decks and other devices.
The just as a note, as a reminder, that starting, I think it's next it's on the next Saturday, the Saturday after, we're going to have Andy. Andy's going to be, I think it's next Saturday that we're going to do the first one. Andy's going to be doing Saturday sessions with us for a couple hours a week. So it's a 5-week course on Zoom OSC. So I'm just putting it out there. The schedule will go out on Sunday, but we'll be giving you little example files and he's going to do little videos for you. And we're going to get a free access to the pro version for the month, and you'll be able to play with it. So definitely plan on being part of that. The goal is to get a bunch of us up to speed. But I think that Zoom OSC is really important, and Andy's been willing to support the community there. So stand by for that. Go ahead, Paul, and then Doug.
Can't hear you, Paul. Just about to send on an email to the South by Southwest EDU people for the 23rd. Would that conflict with doing that? So I'm going to press send on that, the 23rd. Okay.
Yep. Absolutely. Go ahead, Doug.
So the reason I asked the question, I don't like how Zoom records. So I screen scrape my meetings or my webinars, and the only way I can pin somebody is by dragging my mouse up on the screen, and of course you see that when I record it. So I'm trying to do all the cutting on a different machine, so that and then I'm taking it into my TriCaster, putting 1 or 2 boxes up, and then the output of my TriCaster is going back into Zoom. So
in the short term that might work, but I will say that Zoom OSC is exactly what you need to do that.
All right.
So because you can identify all the people that are in it, and you can be cutting between them without using your mouse. That's the go ahead, Roscoe.
I guess, hey, just go back and watch our Zoom OSC office hours, which wasn't that long ago, or just Google Andy Carlucci, because he is amazing to watch.
And he is on Discord as well. So, and I think that he usually watches the Zoom OSC connection there. And again, we're going to be doing training with it starting not next week. I realize not next week, but the week after. So we'll be doing 5 weekends with Andy. So a lot of us will come up to speed on Zoom OSC, but I think that it's exactly, if you're trying to do what you're doing there, I mean, the easiest way to do it if you're doing a meeting is to try to capture it from a separate, that would be speaker only. Yeah. I mean, with webinar, it's easier. If you can get a 1080p webinar, then you can just capture the participant view, but that's more difficult. Yeah. Next question.
Moving on, TJ Asher, who is usually here in the panel in Minneapolis, says, can Fenwick share how he has his company logo as the feed in each camera on the ATEM? Which ATEM Mini is he using that allows such a thing?
I think Fenwick left, but I can tell you that Fenwick uses Memo Live for that logo. So he's doing the edits underneath it. And essentially that is a downstream key. So if you have a downstream key on, it's over top of your edit. So if you use the downstream key inside of your ATEM Mini, any of the ATEM Minis, if you use up that downstream key, that's what Jason's showing right now, then it'll be just over top of your whole edit. So it's not attached to any given camera. It is just it's just a logo that sits over top of your entire edit. And the reason we call it downstream is because it's downstream from those mix buses. So it's the last thing in line. And the reason we do it that way, partially is so that you can do exactly what we're talking about. It's not connected to that. And the second thing is so that it is, the second reason you do that is so that you can cut it out. You can record a clean version without all those lower thirds or bugs, and then go back to it. Next question.
Hey, Mitchell's of Washington, and often here in the question queue. So since 300 is a rather significant number, aside from the movie tie-in, is it worthwhile doing something that streams and records to YouTube rather than event time that is blind to the larger world? And I think he's talking about the fact that we are very close to our 300th office hours. Thoughts, comments, anecdotes?
Yeah, I think that we're planning right now to do kind of a little retrospective, on Sunday evening as our 300th version. Although I'm just kind of thinking, the more I think about it, I think that it might just it wouldn't be the 300th, then it would be the 301st. So I think that the more I thought about it, I think we're just going to let the morning of Sunday run a little long if we need to talk about it. Again, we don't bring it up, but I think we're just going to make Sunday morning because that's truly the 300th one. And I kind of like the fact that we're not going to put it on YouTube. So it's kind of a little bit of ours. So 300, we'll talk about the 300 episodes. I have to admit that if you guys didn't tell me if you didn't tell me it was the 300th on Sunday, I wouldn't have remembered. I'm not really a numbers person as far as anything significant other than every day. So, but I'm happy to celebrate it. So we can use 300 as a way to kind of look back. So Sunday morning will be more of a anecdotes, things that work, things that didn't, favorite times, so Sunday will be a little less of technical and a little bit more of just talking about our experience of it. And we'll let it run however long it runs. I mean, not all day, but we'll run an extra hour or two if it makes sense, if there's enough comments or questions or discussion. So rather than doing an evening thing on Sunday, we'll just do a long one on Sunday, but it probably won't go anywhere other than Zoom. All right, next question.
TJ Asher is up next again with, it seems like some folks have monitors wired into their ATEMs. How are you doing that so you can see the monitor as well as have the monitor go out to the ATEM? Splitters, funky cables, or voodoo?
Yeah, go ahead, Jason. You're up.
Sorry. Some of us, wrong key. Some of us have more complex ATEMs. That's the easiest possible way to do it.
And for a mini, if we can have the mini going, like right now I have the mini going out into Zoom via USB-C, and then my HDMI can go out to another monitor. So you have that as far as being able to select what you put out there. So the mini's capable of, the Mini Pro, not the mini is just going to be a multi-view, but the Mini Pro is capable of putting anything out of that that video output. So you have a couple options there as far as that goes. That's probably how most of us are doing. And then of course bigger switchers with lots of outputs. Go ahead, Chris, and then Roscoe.
I'm not quite sure what he's talking about, but I know the monitor that he and I both have, that Fieldworld monitor has an input and output, so you can
pass through it.
Yeah, pass through. So I'm sure a lot of those little monitors have that option too. Yep. So
Roscoe,
monoprice splitters, they work.
There you go. Absolutely. Next question.
Dan Huber's up next from Erie, Pennsylvania with, can you discuss what HDCP content is? Why does some hardware support it and some does not?
Go ahead, Jason.
HDCP is high definition copy protection, and it is basically the way to attempt to digitally get rid of the analog loop, which means if I can record it, I can steal it. Right. As far as the details of exactly how it works, it depends on your medium.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
It's actually, let me click back on my window here. It's actually high bandwidth digital content protection. And the key is that the piece of equipment that's receiving has to send a signal back to the sending piece of equipment that says, I will not copy you. I will not record you.
Scout's honor.
Scout's honor. Yeah. And so that's really what it's about. So that when you turn on a device that wants to send an HDMI signal down HDMI with HDCP, the receiving device has to be there telling it, I am not stealing you. It frustrates the world.
And so generally it's copywritten material. So there's just a lot of controls depending on what service you're using as to where you can share it, whether it's over Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or cable. Most of the HDCP is your HDMI cable, kind of managing that connection to make sure that it's only plugging in from your source to something that is going to protect that chain. Now the reality is that there are a wide variety of Chinese manufacturers that sell cheap HDMI to SDI converters. They tell the HDMI won't steal it, and then convert it to SDI, and SDI doesn't carry HDCP. So they'll hook into it, and then they'll just pass SDI out the other end. And they're like AView, I think, makes them, and there's other people that make them. And so I think the industry kind of gave up on those. The industry did throw a fit, and I think they've been able to block the import of. There are 4K versions of those boxes in China. They are not in the United States, I don't think, because the movie industry went crazy. When that started popping out. Go ahead, Jason.
I guess one more anecdotal thing. SDI is one way. It always is one way, one direction. And as such, there is no HDCP on SDI, which is why the Blackmagic boxes won't give you an input.
Okay. Any next question?
David Brady in New York is up next, and he wants
Art, do you have a question? I couldn't tell whether you were asking a question or whether your hand was kind of up, but I didn't know if it was just sitting up or whether you were ready to ask or answer it. Go ahead, Art.
Oh, I was just going to say that my past experience with video conference rooms and things like that, they sometimes have Crestron matrices that pass signals all back and forth and everything, and a lot of the times you can just go in to the settings within the Crestron matrix system and turn off the HDCP support, and then everything just passes on through. Right. And if you don't do that, you wind up with this bright green screen instead of whatever you're trying to send.
Right. Absolutely. Next question.
Okay, David Brady in New York is wants to talk about the subtleties of Zoom rooms when using them for hybrid productions. Are these Zoom rooms for shared spaces or personal Zoom rooms? These are two classes available in the Zoom admin portal at work, but I can't find any documentation on the personal versions.
I don't know, but I think your Zoom room personal is just your personal room. That is, that's just a meeting. That's not really a Zoom room. It's just you want to create it's very confusing that they use the word room in both of those locations. But what for most of the time, what we're talking about is the Zoom rooms for shared spaces is where you can have up to 3 monitors. You can define what those are. You have a separate controller. Your personal room is just your meeting room. And I never use that, by the way, because people who use the same URL for their Zoom room, for their meetings, what that means is, I can tell you, I have people that we work with that do this. I probably drop into the end of somebody else's meeting, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, where I'm on time. And what's interesting is I've learned not to ever be early for my meetings. I'm always there in that 1 minute between 00 and 1 or 30 and 31 or whatever it is. I get in there so that I don't show up 10 minutes early or 5 minutes early and just let my computer run, because I'm afraid I'm going to jump into somebody else's meeting. So when I have meetings with people, I always create a new meeting, a new meeting code, I don't want anyone wandering in. I've had actually people come in the wrong day into the same meeting, and now the host wasn't there. And so this is uncomfortable. 2 people who don't know each other, like, hi, how's it going? I have no idea why you're here. Next question.
Moving on to Chris Comfort in New York and here in the panel. What's the best way to get a 360-degree image into a website or onto a website for something like a simple single-room art gallery tour, as an example?
Go ahead. There are a variety of services, and I actually don't know the names of them anymore, that will provide 360 players. And so what they'll support is you just throw up your rectangular, version that's been unwrapped. You throw it in, and they'll put it into a 360 player. And I have to admit that I haven't had to do it for so long that I don't remember. It was a thing. It was all the rage in 2005. we made virtual tours everywhere. I built a virtual tour of Great Zimbabwe, in Zimbabwe in 2001 or 2, and we built ones of the Metreon in San Francisco, and there was a lot of that stuff done at that time, and I think it just never got a lot of uptake. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I'm helping a friend who works at a gallery, and it's a simple one-room thing. They tried something that was more web browser driven, and it was very clunky and really difficult to use. And it was CG, and it was very poorly done like that too. I mean, even if it was done in Blender, it could have been done better. But I was thinking of just rendering out like a, whatever the 360 still image protocol is, and then putting
Yeah.
that up as, with the scroll to zoom and just the simple mousing around is so much easier.
I mean, you may want to look at something like Google has one called Tour Creator.
Okay.
And I know that they've done a fair bit of work on it. They're trying to, so they've got some pieces of that might be useful. So
Chris,
that's
are
the
you
only
Mac
one that
or
comes to
PC?
mind.
I'm PC. I mean, I have a Mac also, but mostly just PC. So
Right, and Tour Creator will be cross-platform as far as that goes.
okay, great, thank you.
Next question.
Alex, this guy named Alex L of Novato, California says, how do you remote control Filmic Pro from another iPhone?
I can't figure it out. I haven't set the remote control and I can't figure it out. Go ahead, Tony.
Okay, I thought you meant Filmic Remote as using it for remote control,
so-
but you're talking about a separate device?
Well, no. I'm trying to. I don't understand how it works. So it's I download Filmic Remote. I was going to ask it pre-show, and then I was like, I should ask it in the show so we can talk through it.
Okay.
So I need to download. So I have Filmic Pro on all my phones, and
right.
I've been bouncing around between them. But so there's another app called Filmic Remote that's what I'm missing.
Yes, you download
I even have
Filmic
it. I even have it
Remote.
on my phone. I just don't know. Okay, hold on.
It uses
All right, so
Bluetooth, I think,
once you have it downloaded, then you're just going to go to the settings on the phone and make it
Oh, there we go.
accessible to the remote, and there you go. You will be able to control which cameras you use. You'll be able to adjust the camera settings on your iPhone.
Oh, that's pretty. No, I got it working. So like I have, if you see it here,
You're
there's
controlling
the-
it through the remote.
it's sideways for some reason. I hadn't quite figured it out, but it doesn't seem to be controlling. I actually don't know why. I don't know why it's showing sideways either. Hold on. Maybe did I lock it? Hold on. Let's see here. I can't quite figure out why it's coming in sideways for.
I mean, sometimes it just does that. Like iOS will simply do that sometimes for no good reason.
Because it's showing. What's funny is that it shows in here correctly, like in my.
Oh, I know. Yeah, it happens to me all the time. Sometimes it just locks and it just stays that way.
Which device is wired to your system, Alex? Is it the camera device or the remote device?
The camera device is. Let's see if I.
Alex, can I demonstrate?
Yeah. Go ahead. Let's let me. I'm in. It's working. The thing that I'm having trouble with is that it's not. My iPhone is in landscape, and I won't spend too much time on it. But my iPhone is in landscape. But I am able to control it as far as being able to. Let's see. I think I can control it.
I think the iPhone out of HDMI only does its vertical orientation.
I actually think that it's not working. Hold on. I actually don't think that I think it's like a still frame that's showing up.
I have a
'cause it's
current
not a live
iPad
feed.
that does this all the time. I feel like it's one of these funny bugs that sometimes it
I think
happens.
it's the ATEM. I think it's the ATEM that's. So you look at this. I'm one of.
Oh,
the,
it could be. It just doesn't like the violent reconfiguration.
What's interesting is that you're just getting a freeze frame right now from it. It's not working. Go ahead, Greg. Where's Tony? Oh, we lost Tony. Oh, there he is.
Yeah, no, the only other thing I was going to say is that it's very sensitive to any fluctuations in the Wi-Fi, and any little hiccup and it'll drop out. So that's one thing I found.
Is that I tested this earlier. I was very, I was kind of playing with it before we started, and it worked great. And I was like, oh, I should use this all the time. And now I'm kind of more in I should never use this again. That's what happens with me.
Tony's got something on his screen.
Go ahead, Tony.
I don't know.
Okay, so Right now, I have my iPhone pointed at my screen, and okay. And I apologize for all of the conversation. My household is waking up and moving about. So that is, let's see, this is the iPad,
Uh-huh.
and I'm controlling everything on the iPad. So let's see. Let me go into settings, and now I'm going to change cameras. So that's telephoto. That's wide. That's ultra wide. That's zoom. And then this is selfie. So you're able to control everything. You're able to do, you can change the color saturation. You can zoom. You can
Stop recording.
Let's see. So that is the frame rate. This is zoom.
By the way, if you look at mine, if you guys cut to mine, it's kind of a cool example of LEDs. So I'm controlling this camera, but I realized I could point it towards I don't know, Bill or Jason, if you can do it. So if you see this is the actual cadence. As I start to if I start to increase or change the shutter speed, so that I would say that this is the refresh rate on the mini is about 1/90th of a second. As we get to 1/30th, you'll see that you barely see any of the flickering, that's there. As I increase the shutter speed, we start to see it turning these on and off. They're all getting turned off.
We go into rave mode. Yeah,
exactly. It's like my little guy raving here. So anyway,
So is that double the shutter speed of the frame rate?
Sorry.
Well, so
no, I'm controlling the shutter speed right now. I'm not changing the frame rate. So that's just me changing the shutter speed. This is just shutter right now.
Right.
So it's so anyway, so yeah, but to go back to it, by the way, and I'll cut back to this. That is so what I was missing was I was trying to control Filmic from Filmic, and that didn't work. And I will admit that I could have Googled it and read a bunch of things, but I was like, it's a good conversation for us to have on the show. So why research it? So anyway, I got smart people, and we'll have a better conversation. Go ahead, Roscoe.
I apologize, Alex. I wasn't prepared, but
you did a great job.
I think that it's an outstanding app.
Yeah.
But it lends me to ask another question.
Sure.
Based on the fact that I know we're not fans of NDI, but I'm just wondering, and I'm just, because I'm wrestling with not necessarily having to have the iPhone wired in to the computer to use it. And I'm thinking for my use, I know that production-wise, you don't recommend NDI, but for my use with my small church, if maybe NDI for the iPhone is an acceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here's the thing is that if you've got some room for error, then definitely play with NDI. There's a lot of things that are, and again, as I start to kind of build up towards this little home system that I'm putting together, where I'm going to try to do like a little cooking thing, and we'll all do it together. And I'm eventually going to try to have other people recording it, and may even eventually try to put it all in the cloud, where I do SRT from all the cameras and put them all into the cloud and let someone cut them on vMix. I mean, there's a bunch of different places we can go. I'm just not. I just would say that I don't consider NDI as a mission critical pipeline. So if you decide that people will understand, if you're doing something as a volunteer for your church, you got a lot of room to work. So experimenting and playing with it and so on and so forth is definitely possible. Now, once you get to 300 or 400 people watching your church service, you'll have less room to work. It's so, but if there's 10 people watching or 20 people watching, you got a lot of places to experiment. If you experiment too much, we always kind of talk about when we're doing things over and over again is just make 1 or 2 changes at a time. We'll add one little variable, add another variable, and slowly kind of work that up. Don't try to add 8 variables all at the same show. Because if you thrash the first 8 people, you'll never get to 10, so you want to, but experimenting, having one camera go down, especially if you have some wired and you have one roaming NDI camera, I think you'd be fine. I think that you just want to be careful of putting all your eggs in one basket as you get started. Go ahead, Greg, and then Bill, and we'll move on.
I mean, you could actually have 2 separate programs. You could have 3 or 4 iPhones out there, and you could do a separate switch in Switcher Studio, Collaboracam, any of these wireless, switchers, and send that feed to one of your inputs in the ATEM.
Yep. I mean, I'm definitely going to, in these little Saturday sessions, once I get through this production that's done next week, in my little Saturday tests, one of them is going to be, we'll just do the whole thing in Memo Live. It's all NDI cameras. We're just going to see what happens. And we'll see how it works, and then we'll take notes and do something different next time. Bill, and then Roscoe.
Whenever I want something to control something else, I do also pay attention to the order of launch. So the unit that is going to control something else, I always launch first, and the unit I want to be controlled, I launch second, so it can register the control signal from the first. I find if you turn the phone on first, and then sometimes you turn an iPad on to try to control it, it won't know it's there until you reverse that.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
I put the Filmic Remote manual in the chat. It's only 6 pages with a lot of pictures. So
there was no words. There was no words. I opened it. I looked at it. I didn't see the remote one. I just saw Filmic, and I was like, okay, how do I control it? And
the link's in chat.
You've seen a 30-second video. That's all. That's all I'm saying. 30-second video on how to do it. Oh, by the way, just as an aside, this is my new favorite little rig. I'll tell you guys about it before I make a mistake and actually tweet it out. This is the rig that I'm using. I bought 3 of these for. First, I bought 1, and then I bought a bunch more for the iPhone. It's made by a company called Woohoto, Woohoto, and it's got all the little things to it. It's metal. You can lock it, so it's spring loaded, but you can actually lock it onto you tighten this up and it locks on the camera. You can then open this up and rotate it to 9x16 or 16x9, and it's beefy. It's a beefy thing. So anyway, you got
where are the screw pins on it? Or do they have it on the top and the back?
It's amazing. It's got quarter 20s on the back of it.
That's what I'm asking.
And then it's got a quarter 20 and a 3/8 on the bottom. So this is the beefiest mount that I've found so far.
Yeah.
So we'll show more of that as I do more tests. Anyway, next question. But the reason I say it is that as I start to talk about it in more detail, I'm afraid that they're going to sell out again. So they're on Amazon right now. Next question.
Moving on to David Brady of New York. On the topic of Spotlight, what was the method I overheard here where you force participants to a minimum Zoom, I think resolution actually? Older versions do not honor the multi-spotlight function, or maybe it's a minimum Zoom.
No, Rev. Generally, what we do is we're a couple versions back, but we force everybody in Zoom, everybody who comes to the Zoom session, we force them to all jump into, all move to a certain version of Zoom. And that's in your web settings. You can go in there and say minimum Zoom version that can join. And part of the reason we did that is that we suddenly realized that when multi-spotlight came out, people on older versions couldn't see it. And so we didn't even know what they were seeing when we were multi-spotlighting. I don't even know what they saw. And so it was kind of horrifying for us that we did a show or 2 that way before we realized that. And so then I became very ardent about it, about requiring to push people forward so that new features are expressed all the time. And it means that everyone has to do a little bit of an update. And I don't do it on the very current version because there could be bugs, but I usually do it a version or 2 back. I'm kind of constantly nudging people forward to stay current so that we know that if we do some cool new feature with Zoom, it's actually propagating. It doesn't propagate to the live stream, to YouTube, and it doesn't propagate to the web interface no matter what. So you just have to know that those people are that system's always going to be a problem. Go ahead, Jason.
Well, and to that end, we've got really good compliance. I mean, you can look at that little gold shield at the top, and the only two unencrypted connections are a POTS line, a plain old telephone system line, and the live stream itself, which is pretty much perfect compliance.
We're very secure for these highly secure conversations. Next question.
Moving to Victor Cajallo of Here in the Panel Most Days, and Victor asks, when I've often heard the panel talk about Frame.io, can somebody explain how it works?
In its most simple state. Oh, go ahead, Bill.
Well, yeah. Simplest thing is it's a content distribution, not really network. It is a vetting. No, I'm doing a bad job of this. Frame.io is a place where you put your work that can be accessed by multiple viewers, and they can comment on the work in process. Its primary directive is for groups of people working on a video or other piece of content to be able to make notes and share ideas about how that project should move along the pathway. It is different from things like, but similar to Vimeo, which is a place you can do most of the same things. But the aspects of Frame.io that are most important are, number one, it's a very secure walled garden. So if you have content that cannot reach the public before a certain date, it has extreme security built into it, and you can't get to anything on there without the correct password credentials. Vimeo is similar and has some of the same, let's mark up a piece of work and move it forward, but it is public facing. It has a big public facing arm where a lot of people can get to that content. So that's really its stock and trade.
I mean, Vimeo is what we used to use before Frame.io existed. Sorry, I just want to say, like, it's it's cute, but the I'm probably not going to ever have anybody from Vimeo on after saying that. But the it's not really. I don't even view them in the same ballpark. Like, I don't even think of Vimeo as like Frame.io. We use Frame.io for everything that we're doing that includes post production, and at its minimum, you put it up and it's super simple for someone to go in there. They watch the movie, they hit stop, and they type in what they want changed. And I've had my parents do it. Like, I did a video for my dad, and I just had him and my dad. If my dad can figure out how to use an app on the web, it's pretty straightforward. And then we use it also for storage. So we put up, I literally right now, I think I have 11 or 12 terabytes of storage on Frame.io for one project. And then you set up everybody as these are team members and these are collaborators. So these people can look at it and upload and download, but they can't change the folder structures and they can't do this. And then we can send out a review link to the people that we wanted to review. So then you have different layers of who has access to what, and moving things around and so on and so forth. And then, but we've kind of taken the approach that we put everything up there. Like, we just put everything we're working on goes into folders up there so that they can be, it's just easier to keep it all in one place. And then you keep on evolving what the folder structures are. And then the other thing is that the upload and download is all the bandwidth that your location is capable of handling, because it does multiple subscriptions. And so it basically will do 7, 8, 9 subscriptions and pull just incredible speeds out of your hardware to upload and download. So it's super useful. Go ahead, Sky, and then Bill. We'll keep moving quickly.
And the comparison to Dropbox is what?
Nothing. Like, not
functional video based Dropbox.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that Frame.io ties into your editing package. So if you do it, if you take advantage of it, you can be editing. You can export to Frame.io from Resolve or Premiere or Final Cut. When someone puts the notes in, it'll come in as markers if you use it that way. You don't have to. There's some people that don't ever do that. They export it and then they upload it and then they just take the comments and work through it. But like Chris, but you can have it be a bunch of markers that show up, and then you literally just jump to the next marker and you have the client note about what you want to do, and you don't have to look at Frame.io at all, from that process. And so it's a very, very powerful workflow. Whether you use that or not, it's still very powerful. Go ahead, Bill, and then Chris.
I want to use it.
In defense of Vimeo, not that it's better, they're just two different services. For me, anything that needs privacy lives in Frame.io, and that's it, because the security is fabulous. But that same feature makes it not as good for distributing things to large groups of people. For example, if you have something and you want to get it approved and then put it on a site where people can get to it, like embed it in your website.
Oh yeah, no,
Frame
Vimeo is good for that. I mean,
for that, and Vimeo is fabulous at that. So there are different functions for different types of users.
For publishing to people, for publishing out to the public, where you have more control and higher quality in code and a lot of other things like that, and more, Vimeo is great. You know, Vimeo does that great and it does live and it does a lot of it. But as a team management tool or a review tool, Vimeo is not in the ballpark of what Frame.io does. But Vimeo does do exactly what Bill's talking about. If I want to put it out for people to see, I want to put my demo reel up and I want it to look good, I want to do those things, then Vimeo is a great platform for that. It's just that it's not good for team management or review, not nearly as good as Frame.io. Go ahead, Chris.
One last little tiny thing is that Vimeo also gets around a lot of firewalls and corporate things in my experience. If you put it on Vimeo, it won't be taken down or blocked as much as something like YouTube is. So it's a great way to get into corporate networks if you're doing corporate work.
I don't know whether it's good at it or the IT folks just don't know it exists. You know, I think it's security through obscurity. Anyway, go ahead, Chris.
What I was going to say, but back to the frame markers thing, it doesn't work well if my method, just typing in time code numbers, which is why I liked having the 10 key, doesn't work well if your time code on your timeline doesn't start at 0. So that you have to know your offset. The thing about getting through firewalls is, in my experience in the financial sector, anything that's considered like entertainment is always locked down, Vimeo included. And we've actually had clients contact us because other vendors who were trying to get videos into through their corporate, blockade couldn't. And they've said, would you be willing to put their video on your server? Because our server's really good at getting in, just because it's what did you say, through obscurity?
Security through obscurity. Yeah, they just don't know about it. Yeah.
We use we built a Frame.io a decade before Frame.io, which is all based on very simplistic PHP, and it's very innocuous, and nobody looks at it as a threat, and we get through everything.
Next question, and we're going to move pretty quick now. We're getting towards the top of the hour.
A. Mitchells of Washington. According to Makana, today is 2021-01-14, office hours 296. So Friday is 297, Saturday 298, and Sunday is 299. Monday is actually 300. Should we have them actually have the celebration of the 300th office hours live to YouTube on Monday? P.S. Are we no longer speaking relevant notes live? What? Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to move on.
We're going to do we'll talk about 300, whether we did a couple extra sessions in there. I don't know if it's, we're going to do it on Sunday and not on air. I don't want to talk about office hours, in the live YouTube thing and I also can't talk about it in a long way. In fact, I'm not sure how much I'll be here on Monday. So if we're going to do it if we're going to talk about 300, we should celebrate it on Sunday. We're celebrating our birthday a day early. So Sunday's a good day to do that, and Monday's not. So I think we'll stick with Sunday. Next question.
Miguel Lopez Waterman says, I have a friend who is doing a new podcast. It speaks about his struggle with substance abuse. He is a performer, and so it revolves around.
Oh, this is a podcast question. Let's keep that one.
Okay. Moving on, then I'm going to move that. You've moved it over. Thank you. Moving on to Art Bly Jr. from Cupertino. I'm seeking understanding regarding the 4K and HDR. Am I correct that 4K and HDR are different animals? I have a colleague who upsped to 4K and said their gain in blacks got out of control, so they switched back to 1080 for now.
4K shouldn't in itself affect your color. I mean, they are two entirely dependent things, but the device that you use to affect the resolution could affect your color. So if you're using a lower quality device and you're passing it through and it's not properly passing that through, and again, especially if it's HDR. So if you have like a HDMI input and you're scaling HDMI, so you have HDMI in and HDMI out, it could come in Dolby Vision and come out 709, look the same. You know, like it would the core of what it is, but the metadata is gone, and it just thinks, oh, this is a Rec 709 thing, when it's really Rec 2020 or Dolby Vision or whatever, and then it will look really bad. It'll look like it's super low contrast and all kinds of nastiness. And so, but that would be the device not passing the metadata from one side to the other. So that's how it would affect the color, is if it's doing something improperly. But otherwise, scale, you know, 4K and HDR are definitely two different, completely different things. But HDR, other than HLG, requires metadata to pass through. It doesn't require it, but you have to know on both ends where it's coming from or going to. Go ahead, Jason.
Just, I mean, to give you a sense of it, here's 4K 30. And do you see that little jitter? Well, that's 1080 30. Like, it doesn't, as long as you're running simultaneous, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, go ahead, Art, and then Roscoe.
Yeah, I guess I need to get a little bit more detail from this person, but they just their system just recently went through a bunch of upgrades, and I guess whatever two devices the signal was being passed through, the end result was in the 4K mode, their blacks got super dark and their brights got out of control. So they were having trouble figuring out how to adjust for that. So they just simplified and switched some settings somewhere back to 1080. And
well, what that sounds like is a 709 being expanded. So what that sounds like is a Rec 709 being interpreted as a Rec 2020. That's exactly what you would get. Like if or a 2084 or whatever, it would go in as, when things get stretched like that, you have super blacks and super whites suddenly, and it's really out of control. That means that you have not always, but it typically means that you have 100 nit being stretched, and it'll look like a 10,000 nit output, and it'll just stretch what was supposed to be 0 to 100 to 0 to 10,000. And it'll just blow everything out and make everything dark, and it'll be problematic. Go ahead, Roscoe, and then Neil.
I don't know who Kevin Shaw is, but I just put a link in a really good video. And it just, look at what I say is be prepared to hit your pause button. I actually put it in Discord last night and watched this. It gives you a quick primer on HDR. It shows you a lot of the issues Alex just brought up. And then, yes, anytime you're moving, even in the HDR world, there's not agreement. And that's why Dolby Vision is so important, because it's going to hopefully standardize to some degree the signal path of HDR.
Yeah, go ahead, Neil.
I'm definitely going to look at that.
Yes. NVIDIA's, with their 3000 series graphics cards, have been doing some really cool stuff with DLSS, deep learning super sampling. And in terms of how far it can stretch content, I'm not too sure in terms of highs and lows in terms of HDR, but in terms of upscaling, it does a pretty smooth job. Like, you really have to start pixel peeping.
Yep, absolutely. Next question.
Moving on, Jonas Dattel of Reulingen, Germany says, what was the news yesterday with Apple?
Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
Yeah, real quick. Tim Cook and Apple announced that they were putting aside $100 million for a racial equity initiative, quote, about giving people opportunity. So that was the news that he announced yesterday.
Next question.
Patrick Shonas of Little Rock, Arkansas says, I've had issues with contrast going from ATEM Mini to the computer via USB. Any tips for how to keep the signal from being crushed?
You should not sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Roscoe.
I was just going to say, make sure you use a good cable, because a lot of people reported that some third-party cables make it really a flaky signal. That's my biggest recommendation.
Yep. Jason, yeah, I think it's probably a cable somewhere, because it's not. It shouldn't.
Self-explanatory. It should not be not a thing.
Yeah. Next question.
James Stedman of Raleigh, North Carolina. I have a client that's interested in using a virtual set with live presenter or a pre-recorded content. vMix has some capabilities, but we're looking for a 3D option that can take in a pre-existing build, for example, exhibit rendering, in the FBX format and accept NDI inputs. Is there a program capable of this?
Unreal Engine. That is like, I mean, you're right down the middle of Unreal Engine broadcast solutions. So, in our Discord, look for Nick Justishin. And he's been doing a ton of that, but it will take NDI in. You can take a set and convert. You'll need it might even take FBX. but it'll definitely take OBJ. It'll take, a variety of other formats. So there's a bunch of things you can do there, but I think it might take FBX, but it'll take there'll be some format that you can get texture and everything else into it. The thing and for the most part nowadays, you can throw a lot of polygons into Unreal if you have a powerful enough machine, and you're going to get a good virtual set. And then the other things that you'll start to try to figure out you'll want to figure out next is how to track the cameras and so on and so forth. So the easiest way to do that is the new Panasonic 150s will send telemetry data back to Unreal, so you can sync where once you get it calibrated, you can sync where those PTZ cameras are, and it'll move the set accordingly to match the person. And so those are, but there's also, second party ones. Stipe is STYPE is probably one of the leaders in that area where it tracks it and comps it and so on and so forth. Lower quality cameras, 422 is going to be less quality keying. That's really going to be where people start to look smooth on the edges. So you just have to kind of what you're better off doing if you can do it is, key a 4K source and then push it down to 1080p. It looks great. Anyway, next question.
Jonas Dattel in Reutlingen, Germany again. Zoom, can I decide which video is on which page in the grid view? The use case is outputting multiple grids for a video wall without breaking the meeting up into multiples of 49.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
It's another Zoom OSC. What Andy's got coming, which he will demo, I'm sure, in 4.0, is that ability to put people around in different places on the screen, but more importantly, not based on a number, actually track their name. Mm-hmm. So if they log out and log back in and they come back in as Bob, Bob will be put in the exact right location that you predetermine. It's really cool.
Next question.
Dick Lieber of Chicago says, anyone know what microphones the U.S. Senate uses, the ones with the pocket clips? Yeah, those are interesting.
There's a couple people that use pocket clips. The most popular one is the Microflexes. The Shure Microflex are probably some of the better ones as far as pocket clips go. But there are quite a few different manufacturers of something that looks like that. I think they just sound okay. All right, next question.
Michael Slade of San Francisco is next with, I have a question about way bad automatic settings on my USB cameras.
Yeah, let me just demonstrate here. So this is the default setting I get on a C920.
Mm-hmm.
This is my IC or 1C camera, but I'm having to run it through manual camera to bring down, to get it to an acceptable level. The automatic, it's not camera specific. It seems to be something with my computer. Because if
the IC has a lot of trouble in default. Greenish, overexposed. These are all things that are pretty common with the IC camera. Without manual control, we stopped getting them because without manual control, they're all over the place.
Well, the 920 is the same. Any camera I run into here that's USB seems to have this auto issue.
If it's on an auto, it's going to look at your entire background to make a decision about what it's trying to even out your whole thing. So if you have a dark background or a weird color on a background or a complicated background, it's going to make adjustments for the whole image, not just for you. That's the problem. Is that your entire background affects the color. Roscoe and then Jason.
Webcam settings, $9 has presets. So
yeah, you can say
webcam
presets,
settings.
But you.
All right.
I don't use webcams at all without some kind of controller for them. Go ahead, Jason, and then Greg.
Yeah, I'm just going to say this the way that a photographer would. It is very heavily center weighting, and it's trying to expose the entire background as neutral gray, which means it's never going to look right.
And we're going to keep moving. Sorry, Greg. We're going to move forward. I'm trying to get through these questions. Go ahead. Next question.
Talak Miguel Lopez Waterman is back from Florida with, what would the panel say the best way to watch a video that needs to stay private but has the same features as a watch party like the teleparties we've had? I got some great answers already on Discord, but wanted to see if anybody had any other ideas. And then his note is, I like the idea of not having to broadcast anything, get them the file, and then link the playhead.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
We play back my classes through Zoom. I have total control of the playhead. People can call out, pause it. Actually, only one person, the acting professor, yells out, pause it. So,
go ahead, Jason.
Depends on the size of the group, but you could also do that through Frame.io, depending upon your group and your account.
The pro, like what VFX firms use, is an app called Cinesync, Cinesync, Cinesync. It's been used for a couple decades now. And it basically syncs the playhead, and everyone has a local version, and it just moves it along. So you're really watching it in a local playout. And that one is still, I think, probably still a lot of people that I know still use it. So that's one that does local control. Next question.
Maggie Barton Baird of Edmonton. What time is Sunday? The Zoom email doesn't have a time.
I should put it on. I realized I forgot that right before I finished it, and then I just sent it out anyway. So 7 a.m. It's the same. We're very pattern oriented. So we still have the pre-show kind of first breakfast at 5 on Sunday every day, 7 days a week. And then we have the pre-show at 6. That is really the proper part of the start. And then at 7, we start on Sunday, and we kind of just run until we're done on Sunday. So usually it goes until 9, but it sometimes goes until 9:30 or 10. So Sunday will be, but it's the same time every day. I don't like things moving around. So next question.
James Babbitt in San Diego wants to know that he's using a 300-foot cable for wired internet. Would Cat 6 cable start having signal loss, and would you use fiber optic instead at that length?
Go ahead, Jason.
You'll be fine.
Yes, 300 feet on Cat 6 should be fine. Next question.
Idris of Arlington says, wearing a mask during hybrid class has affected the audio in a bad way or poor quality. How do you increase audio going into an open condenser mic without sound distortion or being too shrill? Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I mean, there are such things. They're called singing masks, and they look like a duckbill that come out, and they help, but to be honest, there's still a little bit of audio quality loss, but they're much better than a standard mask.
Yep. Next question.
Carol Herndon of Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. Anyone ever experienced issues with Zoom freeze and lockup when using a Mac dongle for Ethernet connection? It happens a few minutes into a Zoom meeting on my 2020 MacBook Pro using Hyperdrive 9-port USB-C dongle. Does not happen using Wi-Fi.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, the implication there is I have a modern Mac and a really junky adapter, and it's the Ethernet. It's not the Ethernet. It's the way that the bandwidth is being channeled. It's not actually making use of that port, even though it's plugging it in.
Yeah, and standalone Ethernet adapters, which I have a bunch of, and I can't quite figure out which ones are the best ones or not. I'm not going to recommend one or the other. We've definitely seen a fair bit of 2020 Macs crashing. USB-C in, it's just Ethernet, and it thumps the machine. If it thumps it, you send it back, and you get a different one. And I wish I have ones that seem to be working. I'm trying to think about which one this is.
I got one that'll work on a 2020 Mac. The OWC Thunderbolt, the travel dock is $50, and the new one, which is 64, has gigabit Ethernet.
Yeah. So again, OWC is generally a pretty safe place to go, but I've gotten ones that have been relatively no name and that worked fine, but a lot of them right now, I'm looking at the ones I have, and they don't have any logo on them. I don't know where I got them, and but they work, but we've definitely sent ones back or thrown ones away that didn't work, where you plug them in and within a couple minutes the computer thumps out. So we're not entirely sure what's going on there. So anyway, there we go. We got to the end, just a little heavy. And so now we're going to move on. And I thought that podcasts would be a good thing to talk about from a creative perspective. Obviously, when I started doing something that what we call podcast now, that it was an RSS feed with an audio with audio files. Like we didn't have a name for it. We were like, I don't know. People are able to subscribe to it. They just put it in. You put the audio into an RSS feed, and then people are able to just get them when you publish them. It's kind of cool. And so. So that's where it kind of began. And I guess Adam Curry, at least says he created it. He might have calling it a podcast for your iPod, and then being a podcast. And then, I learned most of what I learned in the early days from Leo Laporte. And so he was really much further out in front of me. And I kind of drafted on Leo, where I'm on Twit a fair bit, and then figuring it out from Leo, and then releasing my own shows, into iTunes. And so, so we got, we've done a lot of those. And so what I wanted to talk about, well, we can talk about some of the mechanics of podcasting, depending on what your questions are. And if you have questions about this is the place to ask them. But there's the mechanics of podcasting, of how to actually do it, and we're happy to talk about those things. But there's also design, so how do you sustain it? I think a lot of us, I don't run any podcasts right now because I'm spending all this time with all of you. Although I'm a little behind. My project that I'm on was a little more hectic than I expected, and so I'm a little behind on getting our podcast out. But this will turn into a podcast by the end of the month. So hopefully as early as next week. But so where Mickey's already recording it as a test, and he's already got the pipeline working. So then it's just a matter of us packaging those up and putting them on so that people can just listen to what we're talking about. And so that podcast will be, going out, which is a relatively easy one to generate because we're here every day. So that's going to be a little bit more straightforward. But if you have questions about, how to think about podcasting and how to create it and how to, how we do it, go ahead and ask those questions. I know we have a couple people here that have done some. Before I jump, I have a couple things I can say, but if anyone else has any tips that they want to throw out there in the panel, go ahead and raise your hand. Go ahead, Jason.
Well, with respect to what? I mean, should we probably define the thing before we get way into it?
Really, a podcast is I'm going to make it can be audio or video. What I will say is that I did a lot of video podcasts. Not a lot of people watch them. like it's not the video podcasts are not. You're doing something that isn't really part of that culture. Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, one of the problems I always had in preparing was that I prefer video podcasts because I love to use graphics, and yet the show is put out both as video and audio, and so you have to keep that in mind. And so if you use graphics, fine, but don't hang the whole show on the graphics. You have to explain what put some color in your audio description if you're going to use it.
I think that one of the things about video is that it requires us to monotask. Like you're now to get that, you're now watching something. You're not able to do it in the background. And most of the discussions or audio is more contextual. And I think you really want to think about what people are going to be doing when they're listening to your podcast. Do they have to be seated? Do they have to watch something, or are they just going to walk around and listen to it, or be driving and listening to it? And so you definitely want to take that into account. We don't, that's part of why discussions work really well. But it's also why good audio works well is to have, to have that work. So go ahead, Sky.
Well, to that point, I would listen to a lot of drive time radio in the morning because I was commuting in from Ventura. So I had a 2-hour, sitting in traffic. I wanted to listen to something, keep me awake or entertained. And then podcasts became a thing during drive time. I'm wondering, what are the statistics now that we are not they've
been annihilated. like it's almost every podcaster that I've talked to have seen, massive drops in podcasting listen time. Ray?
Yeah, I have. Well, I'll tell you where I listen to podcasts, which I think is somewhat unusual. I have back trouble, and so my exercise, I swim 3 times a week, and I have a waterproof iPod case with waterproof earphones, and that's where I listen to my podcast, is why I swim my 40 laps in the pool 3 times a week.
I still listen to it. I mean, I drive a little bit, but not very much. I just drive to the office and back mostly. And then for me, it's mostly when I'm cleaning. Cleaning is I hate cleaning, and podcasts. I don't think I could sit and watch, but books and podcasts all live in this kind of world of when I'm cleaning or organizing or working on yard work or doing those kinds of things is kind of a time that I like to do it, or doing something that doesn't require 100% of my concentration. I listen to books and podcasts when I make cables. So if I'm making cables like SDI cables or audio cables, it's a great thing because you're just kind of doing something that requires attention but doesn't require your whole brain. And so those kinds of things, it's great to have something kind of in the background there. So but you have to think about that when you are doing the podcast. And the other thing that's interesting that we're going to see when we put this one up is when you make some oftentimes things that are really good live aren't necessarily good to watch later. football is a good example, or sports is a good example. It's really exciting to watch, but how many times do you go back and watch the game again? Like you saw it once, and it's kind of okay. We're done. And so, so there's a lot of things.
I always wonder who bought the Super Bowl videotape, right? Like that they always sell you. It's like, come on.
Yeah, we're not gonna watch it again. And so we were there. We'll see the highlights on NFL reels, and then that'll be it. So you have to think about, as you structure it, is there dead time, or is there things that people are really going to want to listen to? Someone's got an open mic. There we go. And so is something the problem you get into, you can, with podcasts, you can do a little bit of kind of slow cooking, which means that you can talk through things. When you're doing video, I'm a strong believer that video needs to be very to the point. Like you need to, if people are watching it, you need to keep it short and keep it fast, or it has to be dense. If you're not interacting with them, if you're, and again, if you're making it really interactive, it may not be good to watch later. Go ahead, Sky.
At some point I'm going to ask about the thing I'm doing with Graham and Faith, in that it's a webcast because it's on Zoom, it's convenient, but the audio is what I should be focusing on. So
audio you focus on for everything.
Yes, true.
Like it's really, it is what makes everything listenable, what makes everything watchable, what makes everything, like audio is the key to the system, and you should never, ever, ever do content with bad audio, like in my opinion, like unless it's breaking news and it's very visual and visceral and everything else, you can get away with doing bad audio. But outside of that, pretty much never. Like, anything that you're building content with, your audio has to be, stellar. Go ahead, Jason and Ray, and then Bill.
Yeah, I would go so far as to say, having done podcasting for entirely too long, I treat it as a radio show, and the most successful podcasts, and again, there are plenty that break this rule because there are just so many of them, but the most structured podcasts tend to be some of the most successful. And sure, if you can look at a camera, go ahead, but treat it like a radio show. Make it rigorously structured, and you'll find that those are the ones that you come back to.
I mean, if you look at the basic structure of like This Week in Photography that we created, and I don't know exactly how Frederick does it now, but when we created that structure, the way it was very built. And by the way, to Jason's point, structure is what makes it also easy for you to do. When you just have it like, hey, we're all going to talk, that's a lot to think about every week. But when you think about, for the first, like This Week in Photography is 10 minutes of news. Then it's 20 to 30 minutes of a given set of subjects that we've decided are worth talking about. And then it can be 10 to 20 minutes of news, and then of the new highlights. And then we cover one subject like aperture or something like that. And then we handle questions, and we answer questions that came in that were emailed to us. But that generated a 50 to 60 minute show, and it just happens. And you only have to think about one thing that you have to study, which is that one subject that we're going to talk about. Like here, this 1 hour is the one thing I have to think about. The first hour is all just Q&A that generates itself as long as there's enough people to play. Anyway, and then, Twit and MacBreak, as an example, both work very heavily on the fact that there's news every week, hopefully. And we just have a list of the things that we could possibly cover. And then we have an Excel file not Excel file, but a Google Doc that we look at. Leo and I have very different approaches to that. Leo will fill every possible thing that we could cover as a host. He'll have like 40 or 50 items that he could jump to for something. I tend to have 10, or 15. Like I do all the editing beforehand and just say, this is actually what I'm going to do. And then I kind of group multiple articles into one group. And then I have extra content around those. And that it makes it easier I find it makes it easier for the guests, the other people on the podcast. If you're going to do a discussion, it makes it easier for them because they don't have to do so much reading. they can think more about the 8 or 10 subjects, but gives Leo a lot more flexibility, and he can move around a lot and things just come up and he can jump to them. So that it's just two different approaches to the same problem. Go ahead, Ray, and then Bill.
Yeah. I met Leo when he was doing the production Lab with Leo here in Vancouver. It was broadcast to Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Anyway, I did 48-minute segments on that show, and that was a television show. And when I was doing that, Leo taught me to have 2 or 3 major points maximum. Okay, and really be succinct. Then when he opened Twit and offered me Maxwell's House, and I did 70 episodes of that, I had an hour, and I would have an outline that I sent to my co-host, which was either Leo or Kiki, and then I would have typically, about 12 points or something that I would cover in that hour. And again, the television show, I had lots of objects, graphics, whereas in the podcast, I tried to cover it with audio as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Good, Bill.
To me, the biggest challenge I have with all of this stuff, part of it is language, because I don't even know how to talk about them sometimes. You hear the term podcast, which came from the old iPod, and it was all audio. And then we had vidcast, and somebody just said webcast. I mean, the language is soft and fluffy. So is the mental thing for me. It reminds me very much of what I talk about. Am I shooting stills? I'm holding a camera. Am I shooting stills or video? It is an entirely different approach for me. Mm-hmm. And I think differently, and trying to do both makes me 30% as effective as trying to do one well. And so I have this problem with what's the focus. If you're trying to do a webcast, why are you turning on video? If you're trying to do a video cast, why are you trying to compromise it and remove the visual information that you can give people in order to just rely on audio? Is it possible to do this hybridization of this area well?
I think that, Leo pulls it off pretty well, which is that there are some visuals that Leo will show, but we are all conscious when we're on the show, on whether it's MacBreak or Twit or other things, that it is an audio show. And so there's a little bit of an audio description that goes along informally where we talk about what we're looking at. And I think, but for the vast majority of it, you can just listen to it. Go ahead, Sky, and then Neil.
Well, Bill, yesterday you used the term pre-cut wood versus we start with a tree and then we have to chop it and then we have to turn it into lumber and so to your point that you just made, I think, and that's why Daria is very critical to this conversation, I think entertainment is the goal, if not information, or at least.
I don't know. I mean, I think that.
Go ahead.
It might be entertainment. I mean, I think that there's some of it can be entertainment. I think that when I'm listening
Engaging?
As a consumer of it, I want to be engaged. I want to be informed. Here's the opportunity for me when I think about my different food groups of media. Podcasts offer an opportunity to have a contextual conversation that may not be something that's pointed. It's not a quick training. It's not a conversation. It's for instance, when we think about, and you'll see me over this year continue to experiment with all of you related to this, I'm going to try to, once we get through learning Resolve, I'm going to try to drag Charles on and drag other colorists on and other people to talk about, but have conversations about color, have conversations about the meaning of why HDR is important and the theory behind it and all those other things. Now, you don't need to watch that. You could listen to it anytime while you're doing your dishes or while you're playing around with Resolve or while you're doing Final Cut. You could be listening to it in the background. And the idea is that I'm adding all this information that's kind of a slow drip, into what you're doing that adds context, and this gets into, I make a lot of different kinds of bread, unfortunately, for my waistline, and so I can't get away from the carbs, and so but there's so much fun, and so right now I'm making tortillas, and so that's my obsession at the moment, and
beer is my nemesis.
Yeah. So I have a problem with making wheat tortillas at the moment is what I'm making a lot of, but the thing is that what I could have is a podcast that was talking about the history of tortillas, and it talks about what makes tortillas good and approaches and different styles and everything else. And I can be listening to that while I'm making the tortillas, and so the thing is that, but the idea is there's a lot of dead time in those sessions or there's a lot of dead time in our life that we can kind of add that kind of thing where we're not fully utilizing our brain. We can utilize it, by doing something like, again, cleaning, or while we're kneading bread, there's not a lot to do, not a lot to think about, or working out, to make 8 tortillas takes me about, 15 or 20 minutes, of rolling, and cooking them. And I could be listening to something about them or listening to something about something else. But the point is that I need a video that shows me how to do the tortillas, right? I need print that has a text, like this is the step-by-step and this is the recipe, and then I might need a live session that I'm talking to someone who's a tortilla expert who's going to show me, answer questions and show me what I'm doing wrong. And then, but then there's this contextual thing. And I think that fits into any skill set, whether it's learning how to play the guitar or learning how to do other things, understanding you can have these bigger thought processes that need more time to develop, that isn't a 2.5 minute soundbite, that gives you a context and really helps you move to the point of from operator to mastery, operation to mastery. We can very quickly, a lot of these other things fix those things, but these longer conversations, in a lot of ways, the conversations we have here over a long period of time move us to a point of mastery where we contextually understand the knowledge that we're actually using. Go ahead, Neil, and then Jason, and then we'll go to questions after that.
To touch on a point made up a few minutes ago, having some of the good, really good podcasters, doesn't matter what the genre is, if it's mostly just an audio format, but they're talking about something that's video, they'll tell you, hey, for those who are listening, just switch on your video if you can, or if not, go to YouTube and type in this, or go to Google and type in this. But then there are some things that are like could be just that you would you were talking about color in HDR, Alex, and Peter Doyle had there's a video called The Changing Role of a Colorist, where I listened to it, and you could without having video, you could really understand what he's talking about, but the video adds a really good amount of layer to see what he's talking about in terms of what he's doing. So it doesn't have to be video, and it doesn't just have to be audio. You could kind of mix the two depending on what you want your content to be and how you plan it out, which goes back to the whole thing about plan.
And I also think, though, that you can also think about different formats. So YouTube might be a great format, or even TikTok for video pieces of that, and then an audio conversation. I do think you can mix and match, but if you mix and match too much, it gets back into it's hard for both sides, Jason, but harder for the people listening if you have too much video. Go ahead, Jason.
Well, and to expound a little bit more on what you were saying, doing your tortillas, listening to somebody who's an expert at tortillas, along those lines, I will routinely listen to an audiobook, and, I might catch every 10% of it, but it's kind of like it's the noise that keeps me on track and invites my mind to kind of have this serendipitous journey. The point is not perfect recall. The purpose is to kind of inform and inspire, and then, it's like visiting friends, and, whatever the topic may be, it is.
Yep, absolutely. Let's jump to the questions, Bill.
Okay, but I'm a little concerned because Daria and Sage are back, but you said something and I couldn't hear you even when you were unmuted. So can you do a very quick?
Can you hear us?
There you are.
Oh, we can hear you now. What were we going to say, Daria?
I said that we should do a second hour about bread. I was just joking.
we're gonna
bagels. Dude, we have to talk about this. It's so much fun. I'm completely quarantine baker crazy.
I know there's a lot of quarantine bakers, and there's a show. There's your show name, Quarantine Baker.
Quarantine Bakers.
But make bagels with no hole. Anyway, we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the interesting thing is that what I'm playing with is putting up slowly a couple different rigs for teaching cooking. And then what we're working on, though, is remoting in. So I'm creating a system where I can have somebody else manage the audio online. I'm trying to get to a point where everyone can manage it, and I'm only just cooking. And of course, the reason for that is so that I could send a kit to a chef, and all they have to do is set the kit up, and then and then they can just do their thing, and they don't have to do anything. You know, we do it all remotely. Mine will break a lot. The goal is to have mine break a lot, and then theirs not break at all. So
home bakers like yourself, I will teach you guys my pizza and my bagels. They're amazing.
Okay, we're ready.
My brother Sage, I wanted to bring him because he's an amazing person and an amazing screenwriter. And during quarantine, he started making his first narrative podcast. So I don't know if we're going to get to like more kind of cinematic audio experiences, but he's been doing some really exciting experimentation, and he hasn't launched anything yet. So I thought we might both learn something.
Yeah, we'll come back to that before we get to the end of the hour. Thanks. We're going to answer a couple questions, and we'll come back. Yeah, we'll answer a couple questions, then we'll come back to that. Next first question.
Okay, Talak Miguel Lopez Waterman is back with, I have a friend who's doing a new podcast. It speaks about his struggle with substance abuse. He's a performer, and so it revolves around the performing arts. Despite the niche, do you think this podcast is good for the larger world? What have the podcasters found to be the best way to get more listeners?
Now go ahead, Jason.
There is no perfect formula. And I feel like, glancing down these questions, your audience will surprise you at what works and what doesn't. The trick is just go with the flow and be willing to be flexible.
Go ahead, Neil.
Consistency. If you're going to do it once a day, do it every day. If you're going to do it once a week, do it once a week. But make sure that when someone tunes in, they will know specifically that they can come back at another time on a set day time to see your content. Consistency. To answer the second part of that question.
Yeah, in terms of whether or not it's a good idea, Alex, I still remember, 15 years ago or so, listening to you on a show say, if it could be a magazine, it could probably be a podcast.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really wise, and it gave me a lot to think about. I also think that, like Neil just said, that consistency of, produce a show that you can consistently produce, because part of what you're doing is building a relationship with the listener.
Mm-hmm.
And especially, something like substance abuse, this is somebody who's obviously reaching out for something to hold on to, and you need to be there for that person. So design a show that you can produce weekly. A lot of times people, like, their first episode is all this whiz bang and like, oh, that was so great, because, it's like your first album, you have a lifetime of experience to put into these songs, and then you have one tour around the country in a crappy bus to write the next group of songs. So you have to, you have to produce something, design a production workflow that you can do consistently.
We made an observation when I worked for Sony, just to go that one little note, is that bands that their first album, that when they were in their mid-20s or older, their first album was often their best album because they had 10 years of whatever. If their first album is in their early 20s or their teens, then their best album was about their third album. So it was because they had less time and they were just hacking stuff out and putting stuff together. But if they came into it later in life, they just had so much packed up, and they had 80 songs to get down to 12, and then they popped out with an album, and it was great. I mean, I think that there's some that started really early that did it, but like anyway, so it's just off the rails observation about bands and putting things out. But the one thing you'll notice is that I'm very careful about what I would call expectation inflation. So we don't add that a lot to this because I got to do it every day. To your point, I could add a lot of whiz bang. We do shows that have a lot of whiz bang, have tons of graphics and play out, and they're in, all kinds of things, but I know that I can't do those shows every day and maintain it without it being a full-time thing, or without it being a team of 10 people doing it. And so I kind of manage that process. Go ahead, Roscoe, and then Jason, and then we'll move on.
I was just going to say cross promotion. There's a lot of other podcasts. I mean, Alex, most people know you because of Twit, which, helped launch this and all that kind of stuff. So,
one of the things to look at is, number one, what I would say really quickly is, number one, make sure that it's high quality. So the number one thing you can do to make sure that people listen to it is that the audio is good, and that you want to record yourself and listen to yourself. If you're saying, every 10 seconds, it's hard to listen to. You have to, look at what that is. And I'm still trying to get rid of, but it's something that you want to work on. So number one is make sure you got a great mic, that you record it well, that you figure out how you can sound good and have some order to it. So, and just so good ball handling skills. Number two is consistency. Exactly what has been said a couple times here. You got to do it at the same, what Neil said, same time. If you say it's Monday at 8, it's Monday at 8. If you're done with it at Sunday at 10, don't wait until Monday at 8. Like, publish it exactly when you say you're going to publish it. People get into a pattern. And I would say that any pattern slower than once a week, any pattern faster than once a week is hard to maintain. Any pattern slower than once a week is hard to keep the audience. They just don't. And if it's irregular or if it's longer than once a week, it doesn't get into their head, right? We're very pattern oriented because of broadcast TV, I think, but it's just really hard to do that. And then what Roscoe just said with cross promotion, once you prove that you can do a good podcast and that you could do it regularly, as you bring other people in, that are leaders in that area or other people that might have some following, and you encourage them to promote that they're going to be on the show. And what happens is you start cross-pollinating your listenership, so that, because the thing is that rarely are you competing with them, because people just who are into that subject are just going to listen to more of that subject. Go ahead, Jason.
I would say, just as a word of advice, I'd say the most common mistake is that people burn themselves out. You're going to spend so much time editing that which you can't do live. You will never be able to do regularly because you'll make yourself crazy. Unless you are independently wealthy and can hire an editor, forget about it. Just get used to getting good at it.
And you can, like, if you decide that this is something for your band, something for your brand or something for your company. My sister does one, and she actually pays someone still to do. She does one called Familiar Light. I think she might have just changed the name, but anyway, but she talks to photographers, and she has a friend of ours edit it, and it doesn't cost that much. It's like $50 or something like that to have someone go through it and just kind of clean it up. And so it does make a difference. And again, that helps a lot to make it sound better. Let's keep moving because we're going to run out of time. Go ahead. Next question.
It comes from the Maranatha Spanish Church, but I'm concerned because it's in first person, so I'm just going to read it as says. I do a weekly audio podcast through iTunes. Somehow every week creates 2 presentations. At least that's how I see it in my podcast player. How can I fix it?
Go ahead, Jason.
It's it's somewhat simple. Look at the XML that you are turning out, because somewhere, somehow, you are double publishing, and that will become insanely obvious. XML is very easy to read. It's like HTML. The moment you see it, you should be able to figure out why it's happening twice.
The other thing is that I would, if XML is not something that's really easy to read for you, then really look at a service, whether you're using Squarespace or Libsyn is a great service that takes away the need for you to understand how the XML works. So, but if you're having problems with it doubling up, don't try to do it yourself. I don't know exactly what you're using, but consider that a service might be better for you, at least to get started in that process. And my recommendation would probably be Squarespace is the most simple if you're already using it. If you're using something else for your website, don't do it. Or Libsyn is probably, those are ones that don't require, they just have an interface and you just push your video up and you say, okay, I want to go, and off you go. Next question.
Comes to us from Heidi G in Sparbu, who I now understand with a quick lookup is right near Greg in Norway. And the question is, what's the order of organizing a podcast? Step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Can you provide the basics in bullet points from concept to production?
So the way I approach podcasts when we help other people do it, or when I'm building an idea for a podcast, now this one is just, we're already talking a lot, so I don't have to build a lot of structure. I mean, there's structure inherent in this, but when I'm building one, what I try to think about is I designed 20 podcasts. Like, what are my subjects for 20 podcasts? If I can't come up with 20, I'm not going to start, because you can't, if you can't, when you get to 20, when you figure out that what generally comes with that is a structure. There are things like, if you look at what we're doing here, it's much easier for me to think about what are we doing for audio for Tuesday, video for Wednesday. Thursday is more, creative and discussions. Friday is going to be, structural or technical discussions. Monday is Zoom discussions. Saturday is education discussions. When I create those shelves, I have somewhere to put all the content and schedule it, and I can see what the holes are. So a lot of times for me with podcasts, like with This Week in Photography, I would break it up and we would talk about cameras or lens type things or lighting type things, and I break it up into weeks, so that I found that if I broke it up, that there's some subtle formats that I do per week, so that then I just think about it. Okay, I need to have 5 of these things across this, and so you end up with 20. But if you can't think of 20 subjects or 25 subjects, the mistake people make is they make one. They're like, I'm going to do a podcast, and they do this one, and then they don't know where to go after that. So think about 20. Doesn't mean you have to make 20 of them. I would recommend, when you get started, unless you're dealing with current news, I'd recommend having 6 in the can before you put them out. So actually if they're evergreen type podcasts, get 6 of them going, because you're going to work through a bunch of issues. One takes longer than the other one. And there's, trying to figure out the production, and I think This Week in Media was recorded 4 times before we got one out, because we just kept on having recording problems, with them. So there's, but I would record 6 if they're just a subject matter. And then start putting them out but don't put them all out. Put 1 out a week. Get ahead, have a queue that you're ahead of. If it's news based, then you need to push it up much faster, within a day or 2 of when you recorded it. If it's not news based, if it's subject matter based, I think you can get away with a lot more. Go ahead, Neil, and then Jason, and then we'll move on.
In terms of like bullet points of what you should do after an idea that you have, the simplest thing in terms of figuring out the tech, find a tool that you understand. Whether it's complicated or simple, if you can find a tool that you understand. Even like some podcasters, one comedian, Bill Burr, started his podcast just with his cell phone, recording audio into it with no guests. It's all about knowing your tools. And then after that, if you want a really simple distribution system, there's it's called, I believe, Anchor.fm. They take care of a lot of things for you, and they publish it in multiple locations, but I would also advise reading their updated terms of service and agreeing that you agree with them.
And hence the Libsyn recommendation. Jason.
Yeah.
Along those lines, Squarespace, I'm reading the question over again, and I think that they're really not sure, the steps of publishing. So I'm going to give you the easiest possible one. As far as I can tell, set up a Squarespace blog, set that blog to be audio based, and it will do everything for you. And no, just because you've published a podcast does not mean it's syndicated anywhere other than on your website. So that's important to know. In order to be listed, just like, the yellow pages, I guess, is a bad example, but it's not like you're in every directory the moment you get a law degree, right? There are kind of steps, and they do not need to happen immediately. So to that end, if you can't get to 20, you really shouldn't be doing it. But don't be afraid of slaying your darlings, because we all like our own ideas.
And from production perspective, I would recommend getting a good mic. Like, I just feel like starting off with bad audio. I mean, because I can tell you as a listener, if I turn your podcast on and you have bad audio, I won't make it through 1 minute. Like, literally, I'll just turn it off. Like, no, I'm not going to listen. Like, I have, there's plenty of things that I can listen to that have good audio at this point in time. If you're not rocking it on the audio, I am not going to bother listening to it. And for me, if it sounds roomy, I won't listen to it. Like I won't bother, if you're not going to put the time in, because I know on my side that it's not very hard to do. You can buy a USB mic for $150. You can buy a SM58. You can buy if you want to go to a PR40, like what Jason has, you can do those things. And so the thing is that it's not expensive. And if you're not going to do that, don't bother. Like, literally, if you're not going to do a good microphone. Now, a Bill Burr can do it because he's really funny. Like, he's got a following. He's already got something kind of built up. He can get away with that. If you're here trying to figure it out and you don't have a following of millions of people, you probably can't get away with that. And so you need to work on the ball handling skills of really good technique. And that might take you a little time, but it's worth it. Like, it's just, a podcast is a thing. If you want it to grow, it's a lot of work. Like, it's a lot of work. If you're not going to put in if you're not going to invest, I would say you need to think about investing between $300 and $500 on your audio pipeline and things that you're going to do. If you're not willing to do that, then don't do this. Like literally, you're going to be going uphill the whole time, and so you need to have good audio. The harder part for us is always good audio on the far end. So, like, if I'm interviewing someone, what we've used in the past has been Skype, and we're now kind of playing more with Zoom because you can get the higher quality audio back from Zoom to do that. But the other thing that we've been using in radio forever is double ending. So you get someone on the far end, there's a Skype recorder, and there's a bunch of other things that you can use that you can have them record locally. And so then they're recording it. The key is you want to get good audio to you no matter what. Record it on a separate track, not you mixed into it, so that you can do any work that might need to be done. Then have them double end it, but get the best quality audio you can to start with, and then have them record it on their end so that you can do that. And there's a variety of tools, and I always forget the tool that a lot of people have me use to do that, but there's web tools that will record this for you. Go ahead, Neil.
Exactly that. There's a tool that I've been recommending to a lot of the podcast users who use our studio when it was open. Riverside FM and Zencastr. Zencastr is stuck at 44.1 at 16-bit, but you can actually clean that up really well using free tools in Audacity, which is what I also recommend to people who have no budget. Audacity is free, plugins are free. You can't layer stuff. So once you do an action, if you don't like it, you need to undo it and rethink about your solution. But Riverside FM allows you to force recording on the other end at 48 kilohertz at 48 kilohertz versus 44.1. And Riverside FM is a really cool tool that also does video as well.
And Squadcast.fm is the one that I've been brought into a lot of shows for people, where it does a double end record and uploads that in the back end. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, just since we're briefly on the technical part of it again, anyone who's done production for a long time and goes way back, does anyone remember the Levelator plugin? I know we've covered this before, but it's back and it's free.
Oh, that's great.
What a cool thing.
Yeah, Levelator pulls all the levels back. Next question.
It's always been free.
Yep. Next
it's
question.
Very cool. Sayamint Sandir is here from India with who should start a podcast. What are the questions that help you decide whether one should start a podcast series or not?
Go ahead, Bill.
My thought is just simply this: figure out who you're doing it for. If you're just doing it for yourself, if I want to throw my voice out to the world, don't bother. Are you doing it for an audience? Have you gained some expertise that you truly think, oh my gosh, a lot of people want to know that? And then you've got something to share. And I think that makes a more compelling program. So who are you doing it for? That's the number one question.
And the thing is, it's also like, is that a market? Like, do a little bit of market research. Are there blogs about that? Are there magazines about that? Are there shows about that subject matter? You can pull it off without those things, but it can be, you want to see that there is some general interest in that subject matter that you want to cover. If you're not a subject expert, you just have to be really nice. so anyway, it means that you're going to call people and ask them to be on your show and you're going to interview them. And that's totally a valid way to do it, but around some subject matter. But you have to be oh so clever or oh so nice, to quote Harvey.
Or
anyway,
British. British helps.
British oftentimes helps. Next question.
Mike Henderson of Colorado is in next with thoughts on where to put a newer starting out podcast for reach. iTunes, Spotify, Self-Hope. Is it smart to include a video feed on YouTube for fundability? Findability. Oh, okay. Yeah, they're both interesting.
I don't think it hurts to put it on YouTube. Go ahead, Neil.
We had talked about this earlier. If you're going to make video a part of your podcast, put some effort into it. If you're not going to be able to, on a regular, consistent basis, put that effort into doing the video, keep it in audio. There's plenty of amazing audio podcasts around the world, millions of them, that don't have any video and do pretty well in their market and their audience. I wouldn't even say that you have to as something that's required to be successful. No, but that's my opinion.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I would try to find an aggregator that'll push out to multiple sources like Restream.io or something like that, and find the audio equivalent of that. I made the mistake of a long time ago picking an aggregator, and at some point they just ended the service. They didn't carry it on anymore. So that was kind of like the end of my podcasting, because I was pushing out to about 14 different sources, and all of a sudden, boom, they pulled the plug on it. So find someone who won't pull the plug on you. That's my advice.
I'm not a big fan of lots of sources. I mean, in general, like I think that iTunes and Spotify are the two leaders, and you can put it out in a couple different places if you want, but be clear that that will be 99% of your audience. If you put it out on those two platforms, it'll be 99% of who's listening to it. So you just have to look at every time you support another platform. That's another thing you have to worry about. It's another set of places where people are adding comments. And if there's like 8 of them, who cares? Like and again, you have to be, if you're building any kind of content, you have to be able to cut off the straggling pieces for, developing the core. It's pruning your audience. It's pruning where people go to find it. It's pruning, so that you're not dealing with if you try to deal with every straggling person that's interested in something else or every possible place to put it, you spend a lot of energy on something that there's no ROI there. So the only two that, in my opinion, that matter right now are Spotify and iTunes is probably still a significantly larger market, although Spotify is spending a lot of money on it and coming up to speed. Ray and then Jason, will move on quickly.
Yeah. My suggestion in getting into podcasting, find somebody that's a pioneer, well-recognized expert in it, send in a bang-up resume, be willing to work for free, listen to that person, ride the coattails, and then they'll ask you to have your own podcast on their network.
That's Ray's. That was Ray's model. Yeah, there you go, Jason.
I'm going to say something that I'm sure that I've said in previous episodes, but it just keeps coming back to me. More is not better. Okay, it's just more. Don't stretch yourself too thin. Focus on what you decide matters to you and do it.
But yeah, I would say, YouTube is fine to put it up there. And people can listen to it audio only. That's what people are doing with this show right now. But I think otherwise, as far as publishing goes, I would focus on iTunes and Spotify. Next question.
And A. Mitchell's, our regular questioner, is in directly for Daria. Daria, he says, welcome back. Do you agree with Sky Gleason's assessment about podcasts being only about entertainment? Using your own broadcast model as the primary example, I seem to recall a priority of connection to content, info, and so forth over just being entertaining.
Go ahead, Daria.
Yeah, I always agree with Shai. He's the sweetest man in the world. But it's actually interesting. I'm here a little bit more as someone who wanted to learn today. I don't really consider myself a podcaster yet, although I have been going live for one song a day every day since January 1st on Instagram, inspired by Alex and all of you guys. So it's in its little baby larva stages, but it's been really fun to dedicate and show up every day. And I really took to heart the kind of Alex model of make sure you can do it. So I'm I could do one song a day. That I can handle. But yeah, but I think as far as the entertainment education aspect of it, I agree with what everybody's been saying here. It's great to be engaged and entertained by what you're listening to. But I think the podcast realm does give you a special thing of wanting to learn something. I actually, because of my brother here, have gotten into exploring narrative podcasts too, which is a whole other universe that's really exciting that isn't educational. It's like a movie with your eyes closed. And Sage has been writing, scoring, lead acting, as he starts to put together this podcast. So I'd be curious what you guys have to say about that stuff. And maybe also a little bit about if anyone has any thoughts about once you get yourself on iTunes or Spotify or something like that, how you get people to find it or notice it on there, if that's even a thing. I don't know, but I hope that answers the question.
So much of it is using either your following or somebody else's following and having them be part of that. I couldn't have started this if I hadn't been on Twit. If I hadn't done, so a lot of it, what's the hardest thing to do is to come up with, I have no following. I have nobody that knows who I am. Building from there is just also knowing that you may just have to do 20 episodes or 30 episodes with 10 people watching, or listening, and so I think that you have to, be ready for that if you're, but obviously Sage has you to some degree to tell folks, and Sage, as you start to do it, let us know. And of course we'll talk about it here. So you'll have, some folks that are there for that as well. So they're finding friends that have some following and being part of that. And then, but again, the mistake people make sometimes, they go, okay, I'll make it better, when it doesn't mean that you have to make it a huge deal with tons of stuff, but there is this concept of, I will make it better when more people are listening, but you won't get to more people if it's not better. So in podcasts, what's great about them is it's just audio, like you don't have to do, you don't have to have expensive lights or cameras or all those other things. It's just audio to make that work. And so, and I don't mean to say just audio, but you can focus on that one thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be a lot of money. But you do have to figure out how you build a network of people that can be part of it. Otherwise, it's just very, very, very hard to get off the ground. Art, and then Bill, and then we'll move on.
Another thing to take into consideration is the search terms that you put out there with your podcasts, because if you use really common, I'll just end it there.
SEO is important. But again, I will say SEO is definitely important. Quality content, well organized with a network of people, will always trump everything else. I can't say that word anymore, but the will always overrun everything else, as far as it's just the thing that there's no smoke and mirrors about it. It's just do it well is something that kind of builds up on its own. Go ahead, Bill.
I'd also say do some research. You're not the first person or even the first artist who's been interested in spoken word as a form. So maybe look back in the early days of things, and specifically for Sage. I don't know how much you've dug back into the history, but there are things like Firesign Theater that were very popular in the 70s. There are, even before that, there's a guy named Ken Nordine who was a fabulous radio announcer who did a series of things called Word Jazz that is just really interesting artistically in the spoken word form that you don't see as much of anymore. I would go back and do some research about this thing that you want to start doing.
And Sage, how long are you looking at having each episode?
Well, it's interesting. For the past few years, I've spent a lot of time writing screenplays and stuff like that, and realizing that, whenever I would finish a screenplay, I would try to send it to a screenplay competition and then see if I could get any momentum in my career from that.
Got really good feedback.
So I would get like placements and stuff like that, and it'd be fantastic. And then it wouldn't actually lead to any sort of production or something. So then I started to look at podcasting as the ideal form to basically tell a long form story for virtually no money, considering I already have like a mic setup. So for me, contrary to what you guys have been saying about stretch it out for long periods of time, the goal for me was to create a podcast that was a contained experience that was like 12 episodes, each around 50 minutes, that would allow me to tell the story I would be ordinarily able to tell with a full budget TV show sort of thing. So that's mainly the goal. But yeah, I love the references that you just threw out there. So I'm definitely going to go back and check them out. Thank you so much.
And it's Alex, when you were talking about like quality, I was like, no, you have to tell this kid, like, he's literally, I feel bad. Maybe you got the idea from my TED Talks. He's scoring like every second of the show himself, which is the dopest thing I've ever heard. Like it's so cool. It's so cool.
It's, I think it's great. And I think that there's definitely a place for, I'm going to make a contained thing. That is that the thing is just know what that next thing is. In entertainment, what I've seen over and over and over again, I've had lots of friends that have some viral video go crazy or something that they did. And then a bunch of people go, okay, what's next? And they're ready to pay for it on what's next. And they don't have anything, and so, like if someone asked me what, like I'm going to eventually, I will see whenever in my copious free time, I've got all these little short movies that I want to do, little short films that are minute and a half, 2 minutes long. If people see them and go, okay, what's next? Yeah, I've got like 6 features and I've got 2 series that I've been kind of slowly winding my way through. So I know where I would go next of like, oh, I would do this next and this next and this next. And it doesn't mean that it will all happen, but it just means that I know what that would look like. And you just want to know what your next move would be if someone, and that's the kind of thing you can think about while you're, driving or walking or whatever. It's not something you have to do anything heavy with, but just understand what the next direction is. Cause I've seen so many people get, deer with light in eyes with Hollywood asking for content, and then they don't have anywhere to go. Next question. We're going to move on cause we're going to run out of time.
Laura Seal of Greensboro, North Carolina is a friend and back with how profitable can podcasting be compared to other formats, and how is the monetization model different?
Go ahead, Neil.
Depending on where you have your podcast placed, you talk about the top 10 podcasts in the world you could find on iTunes. They're making over 10,000, but they're making over 20,000 probably per episode, just from YouTube revenue and things like that, which is some for ads, some of it's paid product placements. It's just that there's several different ways that you can make money, but if you stick with it long term and get a good following, you can make more money on this than a regular job.
For it to start turning positive, generally, unless you have a very specific conversation, 15,000 listeners is about where you can start turning something where it's bringing enough money in that it makes sense. You know, now, if you're doing it for 1,000 people and they are all bankers, you might be able to do it for, you only need 1,000. You might only need a couple hundred. So if it's a very vertical market, because what you want to think about is as a wide market, it's harder for an advertiser to figure out where to put, where to put the money. And so they'll want to pay less per 1,000. So that's the, they think in thousands. And so when you get, if you're paying, like YouTube, I think pays, the advertising is like $3 or $4, per 1,000 is kind of an often thing. In a more vertical thing like tech, I don't know what Leo gets, but I know that in other podcasts that I've worked on, we were getting closer to $35 to $50 per 1,000, because there's a lot more people that are, if you're looking for that group, it's easier to get to that group. If you're talking about photography, for instance, or if you're talking about audio, there's 15,000, but they're all in the same interest range. And because of that vertical group, you can charge up to $100, $150 per 1,000 for advertising against those for sponsors. And so that's one way to go at. Some people go towards subscription. That's a harder way, unless you really have some really, really solid content. The most popular one is self-promotion. So the way you make money, we used to joke, people give me a hard time because I created MacBreak and then I handed it off to Leo, and people said, well, Leo's making a lot of money with MacBreak. And I was like, I promise I make more money with MacBreak than Leo ever does. So it's like, it's because it's all these, people know who I am. They hire us because of the show. And so while Leo might make, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, one job that I get will be $100,000, so it's not, so I don't need, so you want to think about where you don't necessarily have to make. There's the ad model, there's the subscription model, and then there's the Kaiser Soze model. He always makes more money on it than it was worth. Anyway, so that's I prefer the Kaiser Soze model. Next question.
Michael Wallen of Washington, D.C. says, have you used Descript as a podcast editor? It provides a nice text-to-voice editing interface, but the cuts sometimes seem jarring.
I've never used it.
Content, I've said this before, content can be easy to make or easy to listen to, but it is rarely both. When you start cutting corners on ways to make it easier, you're going to end up with invariable things that reduce the overall quality. Sure, it's easier and cheaper. I feel like you either should be ready to put the time into making a good podcast sound good, or you should hire someone to do that. But I don't think that any of the automatic solutions yet produce something at the same quality. Go ahead, Neil.
We kind of messed around with it a little bit internally, and it's more like best used as whiteout. If you really need to just this one little piece and then play it back, it can fix those little things, but it's not going to synthesize someone else's voice for a long period of time, or tonal inflections or things like that. It is cool. It's got very powerful algorithms, but it's not a human.
One of the things that we have found those kinds of tools good for is assemblies. Like a client just wants to hear something really quickly. You use something like that and you edit it all together and they hear it, but you may have to go through and make a bunch of changes or adjustments based on that. Next question.
Alex Johnson is in. You don't have to do video if you effectively use chapter art. You can put up a still image if you're speaking about something that can be shown, but it's still best to describe an image in the audio so it looks like a comment more than a question.
Go, Jason.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Read deeply into and chapterize your stuff. If your stuff has a linear context, if there are, links that you want people to need, that you can't just simply Google 2 or 3 words to get there immediately, chapterize it, make full use of the XML spec, and that will put you well ahead of a whole bunch of people who have spent too much time editing.
I will say that chapter images I stopped kind of doing just because I don't think anyone was looking at them. Chapter markers are super powerful, because if someone goes, if you're doing a 1 hour or 2 hour podcast and someone says, I'm no longer interested in this question or this subject matter, having them be able to be driving their car and hitting the next on their steering wheel and just jump to the next thing, very useful. So that's and so being able to do that is important. So chapter markers, as you change subjects, lets people just move on if you've not gotten them interested in that process. Next question.
And the last one, more comment. I just want to speak up in favor, Alex Johnson says, of putting an effort into your episode, including to include links, chapter breaks, and a good summary.
That gets back into some of the stuff that Art was talking about also with SEO. So if you have good notes, and nowadays you can even push it out and get a rough transcript. Those things make it easier to be searchable. You're more likely to show up in someone's search in that area. So I think that you definitely having more support for it. I think that it's very valuable. What Jeffrey normally does here, not today, I think he's busy, but normally does is putting all those chapters into YouTube. And I think that is very valuable for what we do, is that people can just jump to what they're interested in. So being able to get kind of random access to that is important. And Daria and Sage, I don't know. I think we talked a little bit about it. We didn't talk too much about it. We're now at the end of the hour. I did cut off the questions thinking we'll have a little time, but we're running out. We'll run just for a couple minutes. Sage, did you want to say anything more about what you're working on?
Oh man, thank you for the mic. Yeah, I mean, what kind of would you like an idea of what the actual story, or just the approach to it?
Just the approach to it is good.
So essentially, I wound up serendipitously preparing myself for kind of a unique type of show, because while I was writing like a screenplay a year essentially, or a couple screenplays a year for a little while, I was simultaneously learning how to be a music producer. So I realized that
co-producing my album,
there was this compounding effect where I was effectively becoming someone who could supply 2 very substantive parts of a production for no cost. So essentially, the thing that I wanted to do that was a little bit different is basically treat a narrative podcast almost as though it's this sort of evolving piece of compositional music as well. So there's a lot of music, a lot of auditory content,
a lot of sound
on top
design.
of Foley. So it feels a little bit more of like a high budget thing, even though there's not a lot of money that I'm physically pumping into it because I have all the tools. So so far it's been a very interesting process, and it's been a huge learning curve for me, especially as a younger creator. But I'm very excited.
I'm afraid you've already inspired me that I was like, I still need to do this with my kids. Like, just create these let them write a story and then have us do the voices and do all the stuff and let them Foley. And my kids already know, they're already pretty dangerous with Logic. And so
I've seen them on TikTok. They're adorable.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun on TikTok, and I think that they would have a lot of fun with doing voices and figuring stuff out. I have to admit that and I've said this before, if I ever got to do something else again, I would be a Foley artist, because I just think when I used to do commercials, so I used to do commercials with no budget, and I would come up with, I remember I had one, I don't remember what it was, but I had to have somebody walking through a forest towards you, and all it was a plastic bag where I just went like this. I went, and when you listened to it, it sounded so great. And I was like, back then I didn't know there was a job called a Foley artist. If I had known that, it probably would have changed my life, because just the idea of creating a stage with in your mind with audio is just, I just think kind of the coolest thing ever, and so.
It's so cool.
The moment that somebody told me that whenever you hear like the sound of a bone snapping on TV, that it's just celery, I was like, wow, this is a really interesting riddle of an art form. You know, it's creating analogs for all that it is. Yeah, I have a lot of respect for it. It's something I'm excited to learn more about.
Yeah, totally. And I want to see these Alex short films, man. We could start a whole new community around like this kind of storytelling, and you can stop that and then not like
they're pretty.
Us.
I have a bad habit of making them pretty dark, so they're not. This is like they're like they make DC comics oftentimes look like the brighter side of life. So anyway, so and if they're funny, they're usually funny in a kind of a slapstick way. Some of them aren't as funny, but the I don't know why, it's just what my brain tends to build up. Well, at some point,
like a photo negative of a Pixar short, right?
There's a studio. So I mean, the goal is that one of the reasons I started writing them was that I wanted to use them as the goal where I'm trying to take this group, just to take it for just a second, is that one of the goals that I have with this, or that I've been working on for 20 years, is that the way to really teach people to do media production. When I came out of ILM, I was like, the easiest way to teach people how to do production is to do it and let them watch and ask questions. And literally DV Garage, which was the first one, we were trying to do that 20 years ago. And then Pixel Core, we got a little closer. We did pieces of it. And this year we'll do more pieces of those things. But the goal eventually is to get to a point where we say, hey, everybody, because I have a stage, I have a 50 by 60 stage that is not mine, but I have it's on the other side of this wall, or 2 walls down. It's the old ILM stage, so the old ILM stage is in my building and it's right there, and I've got tons of bandwidth, and I've got all the post-production. We've accumulated all the pieces except for the doingness. And of course, then I was afraid, well, we wouldn't have anything to do. So I started writing all these little shorts, and they're just goofy. Most of them are goofy shorts. And so I've got all these little pieces. And so the idea though is that we would shoot them, and really what would happen is people would underwrite us doing them in what we pay them with, back for people to underwrite doing them, is they get to watch us do it. So it's not like, we have a bunch of skilled technicians that are building everything and putting it together, and we shoot it at a pace that means that we can stop all the time and talk. And so then I love that. And so you can just sit there and watch, and we can walk up to the director, like if we get Marty Rosenberg or someone like that to come up and have him, Marty can talk about why he put the camera there, or why he's doing the lighting here, and what's going on there, and what we're trying to do, and follow up, and have mics on the gaffers, and mics on the ADs and everything else. And so you just have this experience where you get to just see it, because that's what no one gets to see. If you're not working on a film, you never see that. Like you see the kind of the sanitized version from, on the behind the scenes. But even if it's just, and again, the goal would be to even have commentators, so we have like a couple people that are just answering questions and talking, doing what we're doing here, but doing it with everyone talking. So while it's slow, because a lot of production is slow, while it's slow, we kind of, work through ideas and process and everything else. And what it would do is let us play and do these short films. And then eventually you could theoretically make that model work for possibly larger films. And so those are that's the goal though, is to have it be that it pays for itself, just because people are willing to throw, chip some money in to do it, and possibly even get the plates. Like what if we were doing a visual effects thing, and here we'll give you the whole thing that we shot, and you can re-edit it and color it, and it becomes the source of all those things if you're willing to underwrite us doing it. Because I have access to the talent and to the stage and to the equipment, and that took a long time to get to that point. I had a whole 10,000 foot warehouse full of gear to do that, and then I went under. so I'm slowly piecing it all back together again. But I've been trying to do the same thing for 20 years. So it's
so cool. I know other people have their stories, but I'm like the biggest fan of just seeing how things are made, and I just want you to do it. That's
we're close.
Big production that Sage and I are actually going to start collaborating on is a show that we've conceptualized called Unmastered, which is going to be the making of all the music that he's helping me make right now with my new album, and then all the music that he's making, and just making these dope little videos about the behind the scenes of the music in the same way. So I think that stuff's awesome.
Well, and I have this, one of the ones that I'm probably going to test, and I think Fenwick left, so unless he's behind a window here, but is I have some stuff I shot in India, and my goal is to have Fenwick cut it, and then have Alexis Van Herkman color it, or Charles color it, one or the other, and depending on who's got time, but have them do it live and have us just asking questions while we're doing it, and I think that, and then have somebody else maybe have Victor do the music, but they don't get to do it ahead of time. They just do it. And as they're figuring it out, we all just sit around and ask questions, about why are you doing that, and watching them do it and discussing amongst ourselves. And so we're pretty close to that. I already have the footage for that one. So we're close to that. So go ahead, Bill.
Just a couple other suggestions of things to think about. In the 1920s, radio theater was very popular. And I find it fascinating that form has come back in the multi-voice stuff that Audible is doing now. You're getting productions. It's a piece of what Audible does. Most of it is single person reading an existing work of creative fiction, but they'll do multicasts where they're starting to do that. And if you want to look back at Genius, who just popped up and went, I can show you guys decades ago, look up Orson Welles doing Fountain of Youth. It's a little YouTube video, and you'll see somebody who was, they call him that genius enfant terrible. He was way ahead of his time. And you watch his piece of work from back then, and you think, I understand that now, but nobody understood what he was doing when he did it. He really shattered an idea with that teleplay.
Absolutely. All right. Anyway, so fun times. And we'll, I think there's a fun little conversation here. Thanks to everyone who joined, everyone in the panel, everyone in the attendees. It really is a show that we all put together. It's a show that kind of comes together. It depends on the attendees. It depends on the panelists. So thank you all for being part of this crazy idea every day, 7 days a week. It's kind of an amazing thing. So anyway, so I appreciate all of you. And I'm going to now jump to the post show that you can jump into if you want. So we'll see you over there. I'll be there for about a minute until we figure out who's going to keep it going. Bye, guys.